So folks still come in the midst. We'll just have to move around, make room, and we'll go with it. We'll roll with it. Thank you to everyone for setting up and getting it all set, bringing food. I mean, delicious food. Awesome. We're just eating on all sides, eating spiritually and food and fellowship. Kitchen's getting closer. Everybody got to see a little bit of that. Open it, cleaned up a little bit, and like I said, we'll need a little help moving a couple cabinets from upstairs to downstairs. They're kind of the big corner cabinets that have to go the front, down the big steps, down this way, and we couldn't fit them in the classrooms because they're too big to go in the classroom. So that's where they've been up in the youth group for almost a year. So they're we'll get them down here. They'll be glad to get them out of there. Anyway. The title we have is, in the sense of your marriage able to change. Change is possible. Change is possible. You're like, oh, sure, okay, convince me of that. Well, let's get into that. We'll get into the meat of that matter, and hopefully everyone's got study guides or ways to follow along. And but your marriage can change for the better. Your relationships can change for the better. Lesson 1, we had God has a dream. We have the triangle, and that's already on your page there in the front. Oneness is the goal, coming together, God, man, wife, and God all together. Lesson 2 was the definite, there are definite difficulties. There are barriers, spiritual barriers, personality barriers, gender barriers, historical barriers, things from your past that bring up barriers. Lesson 3, there's a process. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes effort. Remember, communication is the highway upon which love travels. Communication, speaking, interacting, understanding one another, actually making the point, and the other one receiving it and acting upon it. The highway upon which love travels. Now, I understand. We're going to get down to like the real thing tonight, in a sense of I understand that many of you may have tried different things, maybe in past relationships, your relationship now, and you may say, Pastor, I've tried, and it just doesn't seem like anything moves one way or the other. It's like a big rock. It just does not, it just kind of stays. It's unmovable. Move the unmovable. That's what we talked about in our text. God can move the unmovable. He can make the sea open. He can cross the uncrossable. He can make things happen. That which is impossible, he can make possible. But you may have said, I've tried to make changes in relationships, and I sort of start, and then it sort of fizzles out. Seems like it loses momentum, or somebody snuffs out the fuse, and nothing ever happens. And so, and you may even be listening and already thinking, you know what, I've tried this, and a few times before, and I don't want to try this one more time to be disappointed. I want to do that. I don't want to go through all this just to be disappointed. Nobody wants to be disappointed. Nobody wants to go through all the effort, and it just seems like it nothing. Just like dieting, right? You're like, I did this for 3 weeks, and this scale has not moved. And you're like, oh, let's go eat, honey, or let's go to Dairy Queen. We've all been there. You're like, forget about it. I'm just going to do what I want to do. It doesn't seem like it doesn't change then either. So anyway, but here's another bold statement. Pay attention to this one. Your marriage can change for the better, but it probably won't. What, Pastor? What? Why? Well, let's get to that. It's not because God doesn't have a great plan. And it's not because there's not enough power. And it's not because you don't have enough information, even right now, to begin to put some new things into practice that would cause a revolution, a change. You have some things, you have some tools we've already handed out that can cause change. You have some of these things in place. But the average person thinks that listening to the truth brings about change. That's what listening to truth, good book about the truth, reading a book about the truth, this is good information. And most of us think, well, I'm going to read a good book and that's going to help me out. Well, that's not really what changes things. That's not really where the truth applies. We've shared many truths with you already, but we have news. We can listen until the cows come home. Some of you knew what that means. How many knows what that means? How many know we can listen till the cows come home? How many knows what that means? Probably very few anymore. That's an old phrase. That's an old phrase, especially with the dairy farmers, where there was a certain time when the cows knew it was time to get milked, and they would come walking into the barn and they'd get milk. So it would be a certain time of the day. But you can listen and listen to things all you want to. You can read things all over, but it won't bring about change. Those things will not bring about change. Even agreeing with the truth and things I've said up to this point, that still won't bring change. And we can sit around and we can nod and we can agree and we can smile and we can affirm agreement with others, and we can even say, I think, some of the things, maybe even going home from the class, you can say, I think that's our problem. You can say that. I think that might be our problem. What he talked about tonight, that might be our problem. And you can do that. In 6 weeks from now, you'll still have the same problem. We started the class probably 6 weeks ago, and you say, well, I still have the same problem. Okay. But hearing God's truth doesn't bring change. Hearing it in Sunday morning service, hearing it in relationship class on Tuesday, hearing God's truth doesn't bring change. Agreeing with God's truth doesn't bring change. Even agreeing that you need to change in what you've heard doesn't bring change. Only one thing brings change: acting on the truth. Doing those things. Not just listening to them or hearing about them. You may say, I agree 100%. Doing those things, changing. And I put that statement on there. Some of you from Bible class, seminary, may have saw that phrase, and you're like, oh, I've heard that one before. Change isn't change until it's changed. You get change, you're like, oh, I talk about change. We need to change this, change my diet, change my activity, change how I do these. But change isn't change until it's changed. Until you do it. Like, oh, hey, I've changed that. I mean, you can say I want to change my clothes, but until you get in there and change your clothes, they're not changed, right? Oh, she's got to get her stuff. So acting on the truth. Acting on the truth. When Jesus was preaching in John chapter 8, verses 31 and 32, Jesus said, those Jews who believed in him, even if you continue, I keep hearing this guy talking here, but I think it's my phone. He said, if you continue or abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. So the key meaning here is, in that verse, is the word continue or abide. Those that continue, those that abide in my truth or in my word, they're my disciples. So it's taking the truth and putting it into practice. He says to them, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The fact is, most of us think, if I know it, if I agree with it, if I understand it, then change is going to occur. But no change occurs until you put the truth into practice. You can know all this stuff, and you can have heard the Word of God, and you've come to Bible studies and read, but unless you put it into action in your life, it's not change. It doesn't do anything. He said, if you're my disciples, if you abide in it, you continue in it, you do those things, then you're a disciple. But if you say, oh, I believe in Jesus, and nothing happens on the inside, then there's no change that takes place. You say, I believe in being the husband God wants me to be, but if I don't change the things that need to change, then I'm just going by knowledge. There's just knowledge there. I'm just smart. There's a lot of people that are smart, or they have a lot of knowledge, but they don't do anything with it. And so that's kind of what we're at, the practical application. How does this work tomorrow morning in our lives? How does this apply when we go home tonight or tomorrow or the next day or through the week? How do we apply what we're talking about? So we need to look at what we need to do if change is going to occur. If something's going to change in this relationship, how do we do this? How's it going to happen? And so we kind of went through a few things on communications last time. So the question may be, did any of you do any of that? Don't need to show hands. You're like, well, I don't know what you're talking about, and I didn't get into that class. But it's available. You can get it. You can hear it, and the outlines are still here. But those were things on opening up communication. That's where the duct tape came in, or the tape. And I don't know if anybody did it, but I put it out there. So I kind of want to look at a little bit of a story before we get into our outline tonight. maybe we can call it a modern day parable, a story. Hopefully this story will be a good reminder for us of what we need to do. It'll kind of be just a story that we can hang these points on. Then we're going to talk about those 4 points that we have there. Because I know we get busy. We get into the same thing over and over. We get into our routine, and we kind of forget what gets taught in class. We forget unless there's certain points or certain ways to make it come alive. And so our goal is to open our eyes as to how the change can occur and then give us some practical steps to take to make the changes happen in our life. So we want to continue down this journey of relationships. And we've realized that this is going to bring some conflict. It may have already brought conflict. You may just things we've talked about in class may have already caused some arguments. Discussion. May have caused some discussion. Some conflict. So in an upcoming class, we this might be a good one. Put it down. We got an upcoming class. We are going to bring about how to fight fair. We're going to learn how to fight fair in marriage. Dueling banjos, battling Bickersons. So here's the story. I want you to pretend that you have a nephew. So you're part of this story. I want you to pretend that you have a nephew, and he's been with your dear beloved brother. Well, I don't have a brother. It's a story. We can make up the points. Just go with it. Roll with it here. You have a brother in the Amazon he's been a missionary for years, and he's been translating the Bible in the thicket of the jungles, and he probably speaks 2 or 3 tribal languages. And he has a kid, the son he's 18, 20 years old, and he's been helping his dad, been all involved in missionary work, and he may speak these 2 or 3 languages, but he's been isolated out there away from society. And so he comes flying in, his brother, they get in contact, he comes flying in, and he just comes off the plane, and he is green as a gourd. He doesn't know anything from anything. He's just flabbergasted. He just looks around at what's taking place, like blown away by modern day society. He's just amazed about this silver thing that flew through the air. He never even understood what planes were all about. And so he's coming into your home. It's his first time to Western civilization, and he's, like I said, about 20 years old. He probably needs he's been educated. He's been online, been educated, went through all the basic education, probably has a better education than most education systems because he's been homeschooled. But he doesn't have an interaction with society and things like that. So you feel, well, the best thing would maybe to put him into a tech school or on the job or something that may get him into society and interacting and get him back or into society and be able to be active. And so he's very mature, very knowledgeable, very spiritual. He's a godly young man. He gets off the plane and goes, he's amazed how that thing flew through the air. He sees buildings and everything's brand new to him. He's heard about these things and perhaps he's seen some pictures, but he's never been here. And you're thinking to yourself, you better keep him close. Better keep a hand on him. I'll keep an eye on him. But so you enroll him into a technical school or an on-the-job program of some sort to get him a good education or get him up to speed and interact with people, and so until he gets his feet on the ground, you're going to help him out. So you keep him at the house, and you think to yourself, I don't want to get up every day and take this dude to class. We need to figure out how to get him driving. So you go through the whole process of teaching him how to drive and the craziness of all that. You get him a cheap car, get him a driver's license. He's smart. He acclimates pretty quickly. And so you teach him the basic, and he's pretty sharp. So he picks it all up, and you show him how the car works. He learns just enough to pass the test, and he gets his license. And so, great, life goes on. And he gets the car, and he goes, and everything is great for 2 weeks. And then he calls, because you gave him one of these little shiny square things, and he's like, figured out what a cell phone was. He never knew what a cell phone was, but now he does, and he's getting that. And he can call you at any time, and he does call you at all kinds of different times because it's a new toy, and he keeps calling you. But after about 2 weeks, he calls you up and says, hey, that car you gave me doesn't work anymore. You're like, what in the world? Why doesn't the car work anymore? So you go down there, and you try to start it, and and you look down, and it's on E. There's no gas in the car. And so you ask him, like, did you put any gas in the car? It looks like it's out of gas. And he said, what's gas? Gas, you need gas. You need to put gas in the car. That's my fault. I should have told you. That I just everybody knows that you need, not you. Okay, I get it. Okay. So you put gas in the car and you say you have to clean and put the gas in there. So then it continues on for a few weeks later, months later, and then all of a sudden he calls and he said, there's lights flashing, there's problems, there's a sense, you're like, I got to do this, and you're like, I don't want to drive it, and you get down, he's like, you get to the bottom of it, and you're like, check the oil, and the oil's low, and you're like, hey, you got to put oil in the car. Oh, what's oil? Oil. You need oil. Oil is a good lubrication. You need the oil in your car. It keeps things to where it doesn't get overheated, burn out the bearings. You can get into the whole technical thing of it, but you got to put oil in the car. You got to check your oil, and this is probably a good lesson for everybody, not just somebody that's been isolated. The more I was going through this, I was like, a lot of people, and I'm going through this in both of my vehicles, right? And they both say, you need to change your oil. So I'm guilty, but it's just been go. So then after a while, you've got that going on, and then he calls you up, and he's been doing this for about 8-10 months now, and then there's just a bunch of, he calls up and he says, listen, and he's got the phone out there, and it's just screeching, and screeching, and all. He's like, something's wrong with the car. And he's like, oh no. So you get down there and you figure it out, and you get in there, and the brakes, you need to check, you need to take it in for a tune-up. You got to take it into the shop. You got to go to the shop, get your brakes done, and your belts are squealing. And so and he's like, I don't know what all that is. He's like, okay, I'm sorry, but that you got to check the brakes. When things start grinding and squealing, you should do it before that. But anyway, you have to get it in there and get that stuff. You got to do maintenance. You got to have gas, you got to get clean oil, and you have to do maintenance on the vehicle in order for it to run properly. And so you can have everything checked out. You got your belts, your brakes, and you realize part of the picture is the lack of communication. Part of the picture is there's things that need to be done to that car to keep it running properly. So there may come a point where he's been driving his car for a year or 15 months or whatever, and he got this lady he wants to go see, and 400 or 500 miles away, and you're like, whoa, that's a big step. And somehow he's like, okay. So he does a road trip. He had somebody with him on the road trip, and he goes to this city, and he's paying attention to what they say, and he gets to the place. But then when he's coming back, he wasn't paying attention on the way. On the way back, he just gets on the interstate, and he ends up going the wrong way, and he's 200, 300, 400 miles in the wrong direction. He calls, I don't know where I'm at. He's like, well, did you punch in the maps, the Google Maps, into your cell phone? He's like, what's that? Like, okay, my fault. I should have told you. Way to navigate. It's a story. And so you finally put the maps in there, and you finally get it to where he gets directed and finally gets home and makes things happen and gets directions. So here's the meaning of our story or the parable. You can have skill and you can know some basics, but in marriage, it's not just getting started or the fuel of commitment. There's going to be times in your marriage that things heat up, so you better learn the oil of communication. Every marriage, I don't care how good it is and how you set goals and even work at things, there's times when you've got to stop your marriage and get the marriage car off the road and take it into the shop. Do maintenance, do a checkup to make sure things are the way they should be. You need to get some time away from everything and have some nice walks and some good talks and some good food and reassess where you've been. And assess where you're going. Where are we going? Are we just going to just sit here on this dead-end cul-de-sac and just keep running around in a circle? Or are we have a direction? Are we going anywhere? Are we just raising the kids? Do we have a direction in our life? Or are we just raising the kids? And that's a good thing. That's a noble thing. Not saying discounting that. Creating an atmosphere to raise the children up, and that's where a lot of things, but there should be a bit of a goal as to what you're doing. And we're going to establish some of these things in the goal. But you got to tune up on your marriage. You have a tune up on your marriage. If you don't do that on a regular basis, guess what? The same thing happens to a marriage that happens like your car. You can be going in a marriage and be working and get so close to everything, and you never ask yourself, what direction are we going as a couple? You get so focused on just yourself individually and your own fulfillment. And if you have kids, their fulfillment and their activities, going here, doing this, picking this one up, doing that. And before you realize it, you've drifted as a couple. You're just kind of floating with no direction. You wake up 10, 20, 25 years and you realize you've never thought it through. Really, in a sense of really thinking it through. There's no navigational system about what's the mission. What's our commission or co-mission with God?